I think it's now my pleasure to talk to you about Bayside Council's about the Bexley School Patriotic Appeal Flag. As I said, Christina will be doing the majority of the presenting today, but just before I hand over to her, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the provenance of the flag, and I'll just share my screen with you now so you can see it. So here is the flag. Provenance is a word that we use in museum and art galleries to refer to how something is created, and the different owners that it might have had and the path it's followed to come into a particular collection. Provenance is important because it helps us to establish if something is authentic or if it is a copy. Now, we know that in 1915, when the federal government was calling on men to join in what would become known as World War I, or the Great War, Bexley Public School purchased an Australian flag, which they planned to drape over a memorial tablet that they had planned to engrave with the names of ex-students or old boys who were enlisting. We don't know why the school purchased a flag with a red background, which is the colour of flags that are usually flown by merchant navy ships. But we do know that red ensigns or flags were often used on land as well as at sea at this time. So in 1915, there were many and various fundraising activities to raise funds for the war effort. And one of those was a nationwide event which was called Australia Day, and it was held on the 30th of July 1915. So for this event, 4 councils in the Greater St George area, which at that time included the Bexley Municipal Council in 1915, they combined their efforts and they had an aim of raising £5,000 for the war effort. So one of the events that they held was a picture evening, which was to be held at the Castle Palace Hall in Rockdale, which you can see on your screens now. And at that event, the Bexley School principal, Mr. Middenway, offered attendees at the picture evening the opportunity to donate an additional sum of money, in return for which their names, or the people who made those donations, their names would be embroidered onto the school's flag. Now, we don't know how much each of these people donated, but it did raise £42, 7 shillings and 6 pence. And there are 59 names embroidered on the flag. So I'd just like to put that in a little bit of context, because it's hard to have an idea of how much £42 is in today's money. But we know that back in 1915, the average male weekly wage was about £2. So if they raised £42, they raised 21 times the average male weekly wage. So just to give you some context, if we were to look at that in 2021, when today the average male weekly wage is about $1,996, if we were to ask people to put in some money and have their names embroidered on an Australian flag today, we would have raised the equivalent of $42,000 today. So imagine one fundraising effort having your name embroidered on a flag, raising $42,000. So it's really quite significant. And it was a little bit that helped those 4 councils to raise over £7,077 for that Australia Day fund in 1915. Now, we don't know who embroidered the flag, but we do know that it was done by some very skilled people. And I've done a bit of embroidery, and I like to do a bit of embroidery in my spare time, and I can tell you that turning a corner is very difficult, and it's very time consuming. We know that the flag is made of wool, and wool can stretch out of shape if you don't get the tension correct and even. We know that the embroidery thread used was cotton, and we know that the flag was most likely embroidered by women at that time in 1915. So a local resident by the name of Karen Pentland has researched the people whose names are embroidered on the flag, and she won the 2014 Ron Rathbone Local History Prize for her research. Unfortunately, Karen's not able to join us today due to her work commitments, but we hope that she'll be able to do a presentation in the new year in Rockdale Town Hall with the flag and talk to you about the people whose names are on it. So earlier this year, last year in 2020, when Bayside Council was working with Lynham Hall to repair the roof, the flag was discovered in an upstairs room of this historic house. We don't know how the flag came to be at Lynham Hall. Bexley School has no records of it being moved there. But we do know that Ron Rathbone taught at Bexley Primary School for 24 years and was mayor of the former Rockdale Council for 4 terms and a member of the St George Historical Society. So it's probable that he had some involvement in the transfer of the flag. So when the flag was found, it was dusty, torn in places, and in need of some tender, loving care. And so members of the St George Historical Society, and you can see some of them there, decided to ask Bayside Council to repair and preserve and exhibit the flag in a public place. So here you can see Jeff, Joan, Tina and Councillor Liz Barlow, who are all members of the St George Historical Society with the flag. And Bayside Council in 2021, the end of 2020, engaged international conservation services to repair the flag. And then we had specialists who framed it and have applied to have it, have helped us to install the flag in Rockdale Town Hall. It is available in a public space. It is a good space for it because it doesn't get any natural light, and flags are susceptible to fading, or textiles are susceptible to fading in light. So as I said, we hope to be able to have a special viewing with Karen Pentland on site to talk about the history of the people whose names are on the flag in the new year. But now I'd like to hand over to Christina Ritschel, who is the Principal Conservator of Textiles with International Conservation Services. And Christina will be able to talk to us about how she went about preserving the flag. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I work as my title is Principal Textile Conservator for International Conservation Services, which is based in Chatswood. And working for a private company, it's unusual to actually get this insight into the history of a piece, because as opposed to working in a museum where you eventually see your work displayed in a exhibition and you learn a bit more of the history. As a private conservator, often we look at a piece and then it's picked up again after end treatment, and then you sort of don't know what happens to it afterwards, or often don't get the same insight as I've just been introduced to. So thank you very much for inviting me to take part of this. It's been very informative already. I do work on a quite variety of works, from large tapestries, large flag as this one, but also small pieces that could be inherited or passed down generations in the family. And at the very latest, I've just been asked to look at a tea cozy that the clients would like to have framed because they enjoy the embroidery so much. But today I'm very pleased to share with you some images and talk about the conservation of the Bexley flag, or patriotic flag. Let me just... This is a picture that's taken pretty much a year ago when I was first approached about the flag. It was brought in for me to look at and examine, and then put together a treatment proposal and a quote for what it was going to cost to stabilize it, mount it on a archival backing, and then eventually frame it. And that then passed back to the client, and then it takes a time to either raise funds or approve of funds to carry out the treatment, and then it came to be approved, and we could start the treatment, which only took place in August of this year. So when you first look at a piece of textile or any artwork for conservation, there's a lot of considerations that are taken into your back of the mind for what needs done and what to do. And first of all, in order to be able to examine the piece, it's important to even just have space. And as you can see, the flag is quite big, and at this particular time, our workshop was quite busy. This is one of my colleagues, Yolanda, in the background, working on a curtain, and the piece itself was even too big for our tables. But eventually, when the backing that was going to be used for the framing was created, that then was able to support the flag, and it could be viewed in full. But when you look at a piece with the conservation in mind, it's very important to look at the materials, the way it's constructed, what's its history, what kind of damage do you see, and what's also the intended use, where here we knew that it was going to be framed. So that already guides my treatment option, because I know that it has to be mounted. But actually, when it was first brought in, it was still not decided whether it was going to be framed or not. So I had to come up with various options for both rolling of the flag, which is a good storage solution, as it doesn't create any sharp creases in the flag, and also it's space saving. But for this treatment, it was decided that mechanical surface cleaning was needed because of particulate soiling that had settled onto the surface over time. There were some creases that had occurred, so realignment was necessary. And then because of the framing, a large archival backing board was created, which is a coral flute backing board, which is then covered with padding, and then with a backing fabric. And the one we use is one that's tested by the British Museum and is approved for close contact with textiles during display for a large period of time. And then the flag itself is then mounted, stitch mounted onto that backing board, and the small areas you saw with tears and losses before they are then stabilized. And I apologize for the typo in this slide. It's not wear areas, but weak areas, because there are over time weak areas that develop in the fabric, and especially flags have been used over time and often shows quite a lot of wear to the fibers. Because of the way it had been folded, there were some creases in the material, and we do a realignment by using Gore-Tex that most people know from winter jackets. It helps keep you warm and sort of transport any moisture from your body out and away, so you stay warm inside your jacket. We use it in conservation to as a controlled method to apply moisture to a surface. And before doing that, it's necessary to test any size of the flag or the textile you want to use, just in case that any moisture causes the dyes to run or to bleed. And if that's the case, then it's not an option to use this particular method or apply any moisture to the piece. But in this case, the dyes are all water fast, and it was possible to use this application to apply moisture to creased areas, and then afterwards those areas are then dried between blotter papers and then with a bit of weight. And what you see here, the squares on white squares placed on top of the flag, they are little weights that help the surface of the textiles, just the fibers, dry flat in place again and be realigned. This slide shows the same tear, and one of my colleagues has meticulously been sitting with her pair of tweezers and rewoven some of those strands of elements that have come loose over time, and it is very tempting to get bogged down and lost in details like that. But I actually had to stop her and say, it is a large treatment, but we don't have all year for it. And she was doing a very good job, but there are limits to how fine and meticulous we can be. I'll just show you the next one. So as much as possible, we do realign the threads and the fibers that have unraveled, and then we use a very fine, I'm not sure if you can even see it here, but it's a polyester Gudemand thread, and it comes in all kinds of colors, and we use that in a stitch called a couching stitch, where a long stitch is laid on top of the unraveling fibers, and then you come in with a curved needle, and often we use very fine small needles. You come in from the back and then just do small stab stitch in small areas that holds down the large piece of thread onto the unraveling fibers, and they are then held back and stabilized in that way. And as much as possible, we put our stitching threads in so it aligns with the existing threads. And then for the outline of the flag, we use a staggered stitch with the same fine thread and the same curved needle, and that is just to hold the flag in place along the edges. And as you can see here, you still see all the losses that have occurred in the flag over time, and that's a conversation to have with the client and what outcome you wish, because this is typical of conservation, that you stabilize and you preserve, but you still maintain the appearance of the flag as it looks now, and all losses are seen as part of the history of the piece and what has happened to it over time. Whereas, for example, if you want to go more towards a restoration approach, it is possible to place a red wool or similar material with the same kind of weave structure, place that behind the flag, and that would then disguise those losses and it doesn't draw the eye. But then you also sort of takes away some of the history. But it's a preference to what is the the intent of showing. And then you see the flag here fully framed, and it's done with a UV filtering glazing, which does take away the damaging elements of light, so that the fibers will be, or it reduces the damaging portions of light, so that the fibers will be as long lasting as possible, and also the dyes are not going to fade. But even then, even with that UV filtering component, we still recommend that it doesn't receive direct sunlight or anything. And also, if you look in the lower right corner, you can see there's still quite a bit of puckering, and there's actually a long line, and that's an old repair put in or sewn to the flag, and we could have removed that repair, and it would have been possible to lay the flag all smooth down. But then again, you then remove some of the history of the piece, and that was not the intention with this treatment. So you still have both puckering from the embroidery process, but also from repairs that have taken or been carried out through time. But for us in the field of conservation, that's all part of what gives this artwork or flag part of its history and gives it character. And I've put one last slide in just with the person there, just to give you a sense of scale, because this is it's really a big flag, and it was a big treatment to work on. We were two full-time conservators and one part-time, working over 3 weeks. And then in addition to that, it was brought to framing, and that is sometimes the limiting or the more a limiting factor, because they can be backed up. And in this case, it was so big that it took up quite a lot of space in the workshop. And I hope you get to go and visit and see it on display in the town hall, because it is really a spectacular piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. That was fascinating. And I really enjoyed seeing the close-up photos of some of the detail in the flag. You could actually see the warp and weft of the woolen threads that were woven. And you could see that they've actually used a technique called raised embroidery, so that the embroidery threads sit out in a sort of three-dimensional way from the wool, from the background, which is another very skilled technique to be able to do. So it was really wonderful to be able to get those close-ups from you. And I also appreciated getting a better understanding from your perspective of the difference between restoration and stabilisation and preservation of an artefact. And it is really good to understand that kind of, repair that somebody must have done many years ago in that bottom right-hand corner of the flag, which is why it looks a little bit skew-if, and why you didn't want to flatten it out completely. So thank you for explaining that, and also for your expertise and leadership of the treatment process for International Conservation Services, and for the people of Bayside who can now come and view this flag and appreciate it and appreciate its history. Now, I can't see any questions in the chat there. If anybody does have any questions that they'd like to ask of Christina, please feel free to type something in. And while you're thinking of those, I'll let you know that we have one more week of lunch and learn sessions coming up, and they are on Mondays, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Actually, I think there's some questions coming through now. And yes, at the moment, the chat is just between participants and the hosts, and then I will be able to read out those questions for Christina so that other people know what they're about. I don't think we have any other questions at this stage. Christina, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, it might be interesting to talk a bit more about the difference between restoration and conservation, because sometimes we do get items in and you know that they're not going to look that much different even after a lot of conservation is being put into that, and that can sometimes be difficult to understand, especially because it's a long costly effort, and then you sort of expect for something to look all new again, but that's not always the outcome with conservation. Whereas with restoration, you attempt to bring something back to what it looked like originally, or what was, for example, the designer's intent.
Yes, that's a very important distinction. We do have one question that's come in from Jeanette, and it's a very good one, Christina. Yeah. Jeanette asks, how long is it expected that the flag will be able to be displayed vertically before new conservation work will be required?
Yeah, so we've attempted to support and stabilize the piece for as long as possible, and I didn't mention, in addition to the stitching all along, it's also been stitched through the center, where you can see there's a seam. It's been stitched along the perimeter of the stars, and also within the Union Jack. So it is supported as much as possible, and I would be. I don't want to put a date on or a time on years, but it is a long-term display methods that we've used, and also the one that are used for in museums, where they call their exhibition permanent displays, and of course nothing is permanent, but it's a long-term solution.
And I guess, just to add to that, part of the best practice of displaying any object in a museum is that you check on it at least on an annual basis to see if it's still being adequately supported, and you would do a surface clean, at least for us, on the outside of the frame, and we'd be very careful about how we do that, because, as you said, it is quite a financial investment and investment of time to prepare the flag for display, and we want to make sure we look after it in the future as well.
And here we've already tried to reduce some of the factors like UV light. Both it's hanging in an area that doesn't get direct sunlight, and filtering, and that often that UV or the direct sunlight can be the most or a very damaging factor for textiles. And then the flag being wool is it's a natural food source for pests like carpet beetles or moths, but because it's framed, it is in a sealed environment. So unless it would be really unlikely that something happened to it now, but it is a risk.
That's true. We've got a couple of other questions coming through. One is there UV filtering of the lights in the display area in addition to the filtered glass? So as you said, Christina already said that the glass has a UV filter on it to protect the flag from UV light. I think I'll have to take that question on notice, because I'm not sure of if we've got UV filters in place in that part of the town hall foyer. I know that we don't have any natural light exposure there, and it's sunlight that has some of the strongest UV in it. So let us take that question on notice. There was another question there about how much it cost to conserve their frame. I'll need to conserve the flag. I'll need to take that on notice too, but you can probably work out that, as Christina said, it was 2 people working full-time on it, I think you said for 3 weeks, and then 1 part-time person. So even just thinking about wages for people, for experts, you can get a bit of an idea from that. And then a final question, if that's okay, is framing the best way to display a piece of embroidery at home? So Christina, more of a question about how we care for our own embroidered textiles.
Yeah. Well, framing is a good way because you get to view it and see it and enjoy it, and it's not going to be handled or braided in any way. But it is important then to consider the way it is mounted in the frame, and also what kind of framing materials, because not all framers use archival backing boards, for example. And if you have a masonite board or a cardboard or some other archival materials, then that can have an off-gassing or an acidic effect on the textile itself, and then that is going to have an adverse effect or can deteriorate the fibers over time.
So yes and no, is that right? Yes, it is, but be careful.
Well, I think almost all questions I've asked is almost, my answer is it depends, and it's to look at the piece and look at where it's going to go, and it just need a little bit more insight and.
Exactly, that's right. Yes. And I know we said we won't take any more questions, but I just wanted to mention that we've had a question, are we aware of any living relatives of the people mentioned in the flag, or the people whose names are embroidered on the flag? And as I said, Karen Pentland has done the research into all 59 people on the flag. Her research is available to read online, and we'll post that information in a follow-up email to people who registered for today's session. But it is available through the Bayside Council website. And I will make sure that Karen answers that question when she gives a personal, a special tour or presentation about the flag in Rockdale Town Hall in the new year. So we'll be sure to let you know when that's happening. But right now, I'd just like to say thank you to Christina for making her time available today to give us a really insightful presentation into how this flag was so carefully and expertly preserved. I think I've used the right word, conserved, for the people of Bayside, and to thank you all for participating. We'll make this recording available via Bayside Council's YouTube channel. And finally, my cat Olive would just like to say goodbye to everybody too. She's participated in many lunch and learn sessions with me and given me lots of moral support. So thank you, everybody. Have a lovely afternoon. Goodbye.